Abraham Lincoln warned that the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. Would you like to know what's being taught in today's classrooms? Welcome to Say What? With attorney Mark Schneider and Pastor George Rosca Jr. They'll explore the issues facing children, parents, and society as a result of the public schools and the forces behind them. Say What is the radio program of Protect Our Kids, which seeks to inform and equip concerned citizens about the looming crisis in American education. So listen in as your hosts, Mark Schneider and George Rosca Jr. unpack the issues and organizations affecting our children. And now here's your hosts, Mark Schneider and George Rosca Jr.
Hello, everyone. I'm George Rosca.
And I'm Mark Schneider.
And we want to welcome you to today's episode 161 of Say What, where we talk about the threats to our children in the public school system, including the dark, grim, and ugly reality of what the culture is like within public schools. And not just that, but the teachers, what they're saying about it and what the public's perception is about it.
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit before, George, but it's been a while since we've had addressed this. And recently, a research report has come out from the Pew Foundation. This is a wonderful organization that we trust. They do incredible work. They're very faithful with the data, so you can pretty much rely on what they do. They've got a great reputation. And they cover a lot of topics, particularly dealing with American education. In fact, in our conferences, often we cite their data showing that America academic performance is lagging severely behind other countries, which spend far less dollars per student than America does, and yet their educational performance is much better. Well, recently they have come out with a survey where they asked teachers particular questions about problems that they were seeing and facing in the public schools. And I think we're going to take a look at some of those findings today.
Yeah. So the survey took place at the end of 2023, so November, December, and it was just recently published at the beginning of April 2024. So this is pretty hot off the press. So just maybe for some context, thinking about, right, Pew Research has done a lot of these kind of surveys in the past, specifically with teachers. But now I think this is one of the first ones where you can kind of say post-pandemic.
Yeah.
The end of 2023. All schools are back in session. There's no mask requirements. There's no anything, crazy or out of the ordinary.
They've had time to recover. Kids
Correct.
have been back in school for a while now.
Yeah. And so it was interesting to see what teachers who are there, right, all day with these kids, they, especially the ones who've been around for, more than a decade, who could really tell the difference between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And so we'll go through the questions that were asked and how teachers answer these questions, which is, I think, very enlightening here for parents to understand.
And George, as far as we know, they didn't qualify, right, the teachers that they were posing questions to. If anybody who wanted to participate, I guess, was able to. So regardless of their political persuasion,
correct,
or whether they're conservatives or leftists, this is a good representation of what teachers think in the public schools.
Yeah, and I went back into the original data. I think the sample size was over 5,000, which also, according to the, statistics, probability and statistics experts, whenever you do a research, you have to publish your sample size. You also have to publish the percent confidence that you have in that sample. And so this is a very, very high fidelity, high quality sample.
Just characteristic of Pew.
Yeah.
So what did they find?
Here's what they found. So very first question, right? We're trying to gauge what are teachers thinking. And the very first question here is about the teachers' views about students' academic performance, and then a separate question on students' behavior. And out of all teachers, when it comes to academic performance, 48% said that it was either fair or poor, that kids in the public school system are doing basically bad.
It's almost half.
That's almost half. That's unheard of.
Yeah.
I mean, usually teachers are very optimistic, right?
I was going to say, you need to think about this. I mean, teachers, they don't want to admit we're doing a bad job here.
Yeah.
We're failing our kids. So, you take what you will about this statistic, but 48% are admitting we're doing a bad job.
And then when you break this down between what was interesting, the Pew Foundation broke this question down into 3 categories. How did teachers respond in school districts that were, with kids that were in low poverty versus medium poverty versus high poverty? In the low poverty, the teachers were saying only 27% of children are doing poor academically. When you go to medium poverty, it jumped to 57% poor academically. When it went to high poverty, that number jumped even higher to 73%.
Which I'll pose the question, George. I mean, to my mind, seeing this, that's not particularly surprising, right? You would expect that in high poverty areas, that academic performance would suffer more. And that would be admitted to because typically in high poverty areas, the family structure is not what it is. In more affluent areas, there's a higher crime rate. Kids are dealing with, all kinds of social issues that are destructive to a learning experience in the school. So,
yeah, and this is, I think one of the reasons why we've been such big proponents of school choice. Because why should a family be stuck to the school in their zip code? If you are, barely getting by, more than likely living in a high poverty area, and if you are a parent who cares about your child's education and says, I want to do something else, I can't just put him to the school that's right next door because that's the public school and that's all I can afford, right? So you're trapped perpetually in that vicious cycle. And so here comes the school choice model, which affords you the possibility of taking a certain amount of monies to be able to redirect those monies and send them to maybe there's a private school in your zip code that is better equipped at giving the education that you want for your child. And what was interesting is a second part to this question is not just academic performance, but in paralleling the response to the survey was, how about student behavior? And instead of 48%, 49% of teachers, so basically right the same. Academic performance maybe looks like has a strong correlation to behavior. And we'll talk about discipline policies that have changed over time that are probably fomenting some of this.
George, what was interesting about this particular question was that while the behavior was noted as being a bigger problem in high poverty area, the percentage was not nearly as much as academic performance, which means that even in affluent areas, behavior is a big problem.
Yes, it is.
So that's important to understand.
All right, next question. They wanted to understand about the impacts of the pandemic. And the result says this: most teachers say the pandemic has had a lasting negative impact on students' behavior, academic performance, and emotional well-being. When teachers responded to the survey, when it came to students' behavior, they selected very negative and somewhat negative at a combined 82% of
Incredible.
Teachers said that. When it came to students' academic performance, again, 82% said that. Students' emotional well-being was 78%. And then the way parents interact with teachers, if that has had a negative impact as a result of the pandemic, that was at 55%. But it's very telling, 82, 78. When it comes to students' behavior, academic performance, and emotional well-being, the COVID-19 pandemic did something very damaging. And I was scratching my head to think, like, what was the common denominator of what happened during the pandemic that could have potentially caused this? There's only one answer I could think of. Teachers' unions pushing school shutdowns.
Yeah, they did in droves. And they were very successful at it.
Very successful at it. And so, I don't think we need to be rocket scientists here to kind of put two and two together. Now, will the teachers union admit that? Will these very teachers, 82% of them, who are probably 90% of them are part of the teachers union, they don't even see the incongruence of their own response, right, to the survey. And I'm sure they're going to continue paying their union dues faithfully and letting their union leaders and mob bosses continue to push whatever political agenda they have. And it's in stark contrast to the reality of the way they've answered these questions.
That's right. There's a true saying that correlation does not equal causation. And that is true. We don't know the degree to which the COVID shutdown actually resulted in these behavioral, academic, social, emotional well-being, and the way parents interact with teachers issues. But there is a correlation, George, definitely. There's no question about that.
Yeah, correlation is not always causation, but this one is just way too much. 82% of teachers.
Huge percentage.
So then, they were also asked, what are the major problems in school? And number one, the highest ranked one was poverty. 53% that this is a major problem at their school. The second one was chronic absenteeism.
Yeah, now that was surprising to me, particularly when it's 49% who thought this. Incredible.
Yes, and this has spiked up post-COVID because all of a sudden you have all of these teenagers who the next problem is anxiety and depression. At 48%, teachers are seeing that. And we've reported on this plenty of times when we talk about social emotional learning, the mental health of Gen Z in particular. I think anxiety and depression and this chronic absenteeism is tied to the hip.
Tied to the hip, and they're basically the same percentage, 49 and 48%. But this is basically half of all teachers are saying that these are the major problems on the school campus.
Exactly. And then when you look at high school teachers are the ones that are actually saying that chronic absenteeism, anxiety, and depression are the major problems. Under chronic absenteeism, in fact, in high school, it's 61%. So high school teachers were saying that 61% is the problem for chronic absenteeism, whereas in junior high and elementary, that drops to 43 and 46%. Anxiety and depression in high school, 69%, as opposed to elementary school, just 29%.
So the longer the kids are in the system, the older they are, the more depressed and anxious they're becoming.
And I would also correlate it to one other thing. High school is the place where in most schools, the triple threat is in full force.
Yes. It starts in middle school, but it really hits home in high school. It
really hits home in high school. And so now talking about the anxiety and depression that a child feels when they're being bombarded with these strange ideas that more than likely at home, they're not being taught. They're being taught something else, right? And so now all of a sudden, this child has no clue. What do I believe? Who am I? Some of these more fundamental questions, and that creates this instability.
Now, George, as a follow-up, maybe we can come back sometime and see if we can identify similar studies that were done in decades past, asking similar questions. Because my bet, you can't say with certainty, but my bet is that anxiety and depression would probably not even be a factor. It would not even be enlisted. Let's say in 1950, for example, as being an issue in the public school system, that now half of all teachers, more than half, see this as a huge problem. It speaks volumes about the state of our society.
And what's very interesting, Mark, you pointed out about, affluent versus non-affluent. They broke down a little bit of this as well. So the majorities of teachers in medium and high poverty schools say chronic absenteeism is a major problem. So when you look at high poverty areas, 66% of the teachers are saying chronic absenteeism is a problem, versus low poverty area that drops to 34%. But what's very interesting is when you look at anxiety and depression, it's in the high affluent areas. So very low poverty areas, anxiety and depression skyrockets to 51%. And that really...
Which is counterintuitive. I mean, most people naturally believe that poverty leads to depression and anxiety, but the data just does not show that.
And Abigail Schreier, in her book, Irreversible Damage, points out something very interesting about all of the parents who started calling her and saying, Abigail, you have to investigate this. You have to investigate this. Who are these parents? These were white, affluent, suburban women who voted for Hillary Clinton, who could give their daughter whatever money could buy. They could give it to them because they had the money. And yet, these were the daughters who were being seduced by the transgender social contagion, right? Anxiety and depression, right? It's the highest in high affluent areas according to this survey. And this is what teachers are reporting, right? So they're looking at the students and they're saying, this is what we're seeing. And it correlates completely with what Abigail was seeing.
Yeah, in the introduction of critical theory curriculums in the public schools, going back 20 years and culminating in spades in just the last 5 years or so.
And what's interesting in this survey, this is the only marker, the only data point where the affluent part of society is doing worse than the ones in low poverty. Because chronic absenteeism, right? In the affluent schools, 34%. In the high poverty schools, 66%. Okay. What does that tell you? Well, that doesn't have a correlation to mental health. It just tells you that probably in the high poverty area, some kid is probably going to work with their dad, probably in the landscaping business, probably doing things together, right? That just requires to put, food on the table. More than likely, those children are in single parent households, more than likely single moms, right? And so, especially in the high school years, those kids are probably doing more. They're taking part-time jobs. So, they're tired the next day to go to school. But this is interesting. Why is it that the only marker in affluent society, in fact, affluent schools being high is anxiety and depression? That's super telling. All right, let's talk about discipline practices. The majority of teachers say discipline practices at their school are mild, somewhat mild, or very mild. And this is 2/3. This is 66%.
It's amazing. It doesn't surprise me, George, really. But when you see it in graphic detail here, 66% say discipline is a real problem. Again, I would have posed the same question. If you'd asked the same question 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago, what kind of statistic would you get? I don't think it would be anything close to this.
No, and what was interesting for me is Rebecca Friedrichs was the first teacher that pointed this out and started to talk about that this was one of the first dominoes to fall 20, 30 years ago, where the teachers' unions were pushing to relax the discipline policies. I mean, I still remember when I was in elementary school, in the early 90s, there were some teachers who were still very strict with their disciplinary policies. In fact, I remember in second grade, because of how, classrooms are, in these rows of buildings, right? And so you have the front door of the class that's facing the back door of another classroom. And then you had the back door of the classroom that's facing the front door of another classroom, right? And they were usually, the first row was first grade, the second row of classes was second grade, third grade. And so I was in second grade. So it was in the second grade row of classes, and our back door was facing the third grade. And as kids, we all knew that the last thing we wanted to do is be part of a certain teacher in third grade, because our back door was open to her front door, and she was yelling and screaming at her kids all day long. And we're like, we don't want to be there, that kind of a teacher does not exist today, probably.
No, they don't. And George, you and I are separated by roughly a generation. And I could remember when I was going to elementary school that corporal punishment was meted out. You didn't dare go cross sides of the administration or your teachers because you knew it would happen. You would be ushered down the hall to the vice principal's office, and the paddle would come out where you would be giving some swift discipline to your backside. So our changes in policies have consequences, and this data from Pew is showing it.
Yeah, and going on, here's another interesting take. 31% of teachers say school administrators don't have enough influence on students to implement whatever discipline policies that they have. That is even lower for school boards. That drops down to 18%. And then even for parents, they're saying it's 23%. So even teachers looking at, the whole system of school administrators and school board members and parents, and they're seeing that discipline and disciplinary policies has just taken a huge nosedive. So, as if this wasn't bad enough, there was a separate survey, and we will just, go through this very quickly, Mark. But this is what teachers were saying. But what is the public saying? Only 16% of Americans say that public K through 12 education is going in the right direction. I mean, that is telling. That means 84% are saying it's going in the wrong direction. And this has a huge separation if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat.
Not surprising there. You would expect this. But the fact that overall only 16% Americans say that it's going in the right direction is quite telling.
So under the Republican side, that drops down to 10%. The Democrats, that's 23%. But still, even if you look at Democrats, that means 77%, a supermajority of even Democrats are saying that the public schools are going in the wrong direction. So that's really crazy. So Democrats and Republicans who say public education is going in the wrong direction, though, give a different explanation. And so one of those explanations is schools are not spending enough time on core academic subjects. So of Democrats versus Republicans, 79% of Republicans say that schools are not spending time on the core, the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, whereas that number drops down to 55 if you're a Democrat. But still, for me, it's telling. Again, the vast majority of, regardless what your ideology is, over half to a supermajority of 79% are saying we're not spending the time on what we need to. And Mark, just in the last few episodes, we've been talking about Transgender Day of Visibility and the Transgender Week and LGBTQ Pride Month and LGBTQ History Month. And they're doing everything other than teaching our kids the core stuff. Yeah. And parents are seeing it, and they're saying it in these surveys.
They are. I mean, this is the data doesn't lie. Now, frankly, George, I'm not surprised that there's a difference between Republican-leaning and Democratic-leaning attitudes on these topics. You would expect that, but the fact, to your point, that a clear majority feels that something's really going wrong here, it should be very telling. Now, if you ask some of these same people, why do you think this? It would be interesting to see the reasons that they give for thinking that our academic performance is doing poorly. But I think that some of the specific questions should be highlighted here. The second point here, teachers are bringing their personal, political, and social views into the classrooms. This is a problem for only 23% of Democrats or left-leaning people. 76% of conservatives think this is a real issue.
This is the response that had the biggest divergence.
Yes, it's huge.
Everywhere else, you could see it that, they're much closer, but this is a 50-point diversion. And I think this is the most telling.
Yeah, I mean, so these same people that only 23% of them think there's an issue here with bringing your own political and social views in the classroom, but a clear majority at the same time thinks there's real problems in the public school system. So maybe they should study a little bit more, scrutinize why why that's happening.
Yeah. So views on why public education is headed in the wrong direction. So schools are not spending enough time on core academic subjects. It varies, again, by ideology. So they try to break this down between conservative Republicans versus very moderate Republicans versus moderate Democrats versus liberal Democrats. And you could see that there's a correlation with ideology. And so your most conservative people are saying they're not spending enough time. But even your most liberal people are still at 45%. So again, I'm trying to just take this with a grain of salt. There's still nearly half, regardless of your ideology, right? Nearly half at the bottom end are saying there is a problem. We're not spending enough time. And this is the public's perception, right? We gave you the teacher's perception up front, and it is correlating. The teachers are, in fact, saying it even at higher percentages than this. So parents, I know this is kind of a lot of information to digest, but we wanted to bring this to you because this isn't, Mark and I just, banging our fists, on a table saying, get your kids out now. And this is just POK's message. And that's, easy for you guys to say. We're bringing for you what teachers are saying and what the public is saying. And neither of this is a pretty picture.
Yeah, and I think we need to point out that teachers, they're being paid by taxpayer dollars. So this is their profession. So in one sense, George, they have a vested interest to try and paint a rosy picture of what's going on in the schools because they're running the school system. So the fact that there's a sharp correlation between what the public feels is wrong with the public school system and teachers is a red alarm signal, I think. And parents, forewarned is forearmed. There's something here. You need to pay attention to it.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. We really appreciate you guys hearing us and watching us. We encourage you to go to our website at pok.org. Follow us on the various social media platforms, as well as share these podcasts and our videos and subscribe on our website to receive our weekly expose. And you can also invite Mark and I to come and speak to your parent group, or even if you want to partner with us in our ministry, hit the donate button, and we will be very happy to receive your support. So thank you for watching us here on Say What, and we'll talk with you next time.